Brian Cashman has been playing a much longer game than anyone realized, and on August 2, 2026, the full picture behind his trade for Luis Garcia Jr. is finally coming into focus. This was not a simple deadline addition. This was not a panic move to fill a roster hole. This was one piece of a calculated, multi-step master plan that Cashman has apparently been building toward for months. And once you understand the full scope of what he was actually trying to accomplish, this specific trade looks completely different than it did when it was first announced. We are exposing every layer of this plan today, and by the end of this video, you are going to understand the Yankees' entire deadline strategy in a way that almost nobody currently does. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because Yankees trade deadline coverage does not give more detail than this, and I am breaking down every layer of these moves as the information becomes available. Let's get all the way into it. Let me start with the trade itself in its simplest form, because understanding exactly what happened is the foundation for understanding why it happened and what it reveals about Cashman's broader thinking. The Yankees acquired infielder Luis Garcia Jr. in a trade completed on August 2, 2026. On the surface, this looked like a fairly standard depth addition, a versatile infielder who can play multiple positions, provide some offensive upside, and gives the Yankees roster flexibility heading into the stretch run. That was the initial read from most analysts and fans when the trade was first reported. A solid, unspectacular move that filled a real, but not urgent need. But as more details have emerged throughout the day on August 2nd, a more complete and considerably more interesting picture has started to take shape. This trade was not an isolated transaction. It was the connective piece in a broader roster construction strategy that Cashman has apparently been working on since well before this specific trade deadline, and understanding the full scope requires looking backward at several previous moves to see how they all connect. Let me walk you through the timeline and the logic, because once you see the full sequence laid out, the picture becomes genuinely fascinating. Go back to earlier this season when the Yankees made the William Contreras trade for catching depth, the move we covered extensively as a smart, efficient solution to their offensive production problem behind the plate. At the time, that trade was evaluated purely on its own merits as a catching upgrade. But sources close to the organization now suggest that trade was always intended to be the first domino in a broader sequence of roster moves designed to maximize the Yankees' financial and roster flexibility heading into the final stretch of the season and into the 2027 planning cycle. Here is the connection that has become clear through the Garcia trade specifically. Acquiring Contreras created a surplus at a different position on the Yankees roster, a player who had been getting starts behind the plate in a timeshare arrangement became expendable once Contreras arrived as the clear everyday option. Rather than simply keeping that surplus player on the roster as insurance or trading him for a marginal return, sources indicate Cashman had already identified Garcia as a specific trade target who fit a very particular roster profile the Yankees were trying to build. That specific profile is the key to understanding the master plan. Garcia is not just a solid depth infielder. According to scouts and evaluators who have watched him extensively, he represents a specific defensive and offensive skill set that solves a problem the Yankees have had at multiple infield positions throughout this season: the lack of a defensively versatile player who can move around the infield without significant drop-off in performance at any specific position. That kind of positional flexibility has become increasingly valuable in modern roster construction because it allows managers to optimize matchups, manage rest days for regular starters, and create defensive flexibility in late-game situations without sacrificing offensive production. The reason this represents a master plan rather than just a smart individual trade is the sequencing. Cashman apparently identified this specific need, positional flexibility at multiple infield spots, months ago, well before this trade deadline arrived. Rather than trying to satisfy that need through free agency in the offseason, which would have required a larger financial commitment and competing against other teams for the same target. He apparently built a sequence of moves throughout this season designed to create the trade capital and roster space necessary to acquire exactly this kind of player at the deadline, when other teams' need for a similar profile might be lower, and the acquisition cost correspondingly more favorable. Let us talk about the prospect and roster capital that made this trade possible, because that reveals another layer of the planning that has gone into this. Sources indicate that the specific prospects included in the Garcia trade were players the Yankees' internal evaluation had identified as unlikely to have significant major league roles within the organization's timeline, despite being interesting enough as prospects to hold value for a team like Garcia's previous organization that is earlier in a competitive cycle and can afford to be patient with player development. That distinction, moving players who have external trade value but limited internal roster fit, reflects exactly the kind of sophisticated asset management that separates genuinely well-run front offices from organizations that simply react to circumstances as they arise. Cashman apparently identified specific players in the Yankees system whose value to other organizations exceeded their probable value to the Yankees specifically, given the organization's win-now roster construction and the players' specific developmental timelines and position competition within the system. Now let us talk about what Garcia specifically brings to this roster, and why his acquisition completes a puzzle that Cashman has apparently been assembling all season. His defensive versatility allows him to play multiple infield positions at a competent to above-average level, which gives the coaching staff genuine flexibility in how they construct their daily lineup based on specific matchup considerations, rest management for regular starters, and defensive alignment optimization against specific opposing lineups. His offensive profile, while not spectacular, provides exactly the kind of professional at-bat quality that championship teams value in role players: contact skills, situational awareness, and the ability to execute specific offensive tasks like moving runners or working counts rather than needing to be a primary offensive threat. In a lineup that already features genuine offensive stars, like Cody Bellinger having an MVP-caliber season, having complementary pieces who understand and execute their specific roles becomes increasingly valuable as the season progresses toward the playoffs. The postseason roster construction implications of this trade deserve specific attention, because this is where the master plan framing becomes most relevant. Playoff baseball places unique demands on roster construction that differ from the regular season grind. Bench depth and positional flexibility become significantly more valuable in a short series format, where every roster spot needs to justify itself and where matchup-specific decisions can determine outcomes. Garcia's specific skill set, the ability to be inserted into multiple defensive positions without significant drop-off, is exactly the kind of asset that becomes disproportionately valuable in October compared to its regular season utility. Sources suggest Cashman has been thinking specifically about October roster construction throughout this entire trade deadline period, not just about improving the team's chances of making the playoffs, but about optimizing exactly what that playoff roster looks like once they get there. That level of forward planning, thinking multiple steps ahead about roster construction for a round of competition the team has not yet qualified for, reflects genuine organizational sophistication. Let us also talk about the financial dimension of this master plan, because the salary and luxury tax implications reveal another layer of the strategic thinking involved. Garcia is under team control at a relatively favorable cost for the next several seasons, meaning the Yankees added positional flexibility and roster depth without significantly complicating their financial planning heading into future off-seasons when they will need resources to address other roster needs, including the eventual contract extensions for core players who have performed at an elite level this season. That financial efficiency matters enormously given the broader context of the Yankees' payroll situation. This organization operates with resources that exceed most other teams in baseball, But even the Yankees face real constraints related to luxury tax thresholds and the practical limits of payroll allocation across a full 26-man roster plus organizational depth. Adding value through efficient trades rather than expensive free agent commitments allows the front office to preserve financial flexibility for the moves that genuinely require significant financial commitment, like extending core players or making the kind of marquee free agent signing that sometimes becomes available in the market. Now let us connect this back to the broader roster construction philosophy that appears to be driving Cashman's decision-making throughout this entire season, because the Garcia trade, when viewed as part of this larger sequence, reveals a specific organizational approach that differs somewhat from how the Yankees have historically operated at points in their history. Rather than simply chasing the most prominent available names at each position of need, the approach that generates more immediate headlines but does not always produce the most efficient roster construction. Cashman appears to be building this roster through a series of connected, complementary moves that each solve specific problems while creating the conditions for solving the next problem in the sequence. The Contreras trade solved catching while creating trade capital. The Garcia trade uses that capital to solve positional flexibility. And sources suggest there may be additional moves still coming before the deadline closes that continue the same pattern of connected, sequential roster building. The reaction from around baseball to the fuller picture of this master plan, once details started emerging throughout August 2nd, has been notably respectful even among analysts and executives from other organizations who do not have any particular reason to praise the Yankees front office. Multiple anonymous executives quoted in various reports have described this sequence of moves as reflecting sophisticated, patient asset management that most fans do not fully appreciate because it lacks the dramatic, single-headline splash of a blockbuster superstar trade. That lack of dramatic splash is actually part of the point. Championship rosters are rarely built entirely through headline-generating superstar acquisitions. They are built through exactly this kind of accumulated efficiency, dozens of smaller decisions that each add marginal value, that compound over the course of a season and into a playoff run, and that reflect disciplined organizational thinking rather than reactive, emotionally driven deal-making. Let us also address what this master plan reveals about how Cashman is thinking about the Yankees' championship window specifically. With Aaron Judge sidelined for what appears to be the remainder of this regular season, and with Bellinger having an exceptional but ultimately individual season that cannot single-handedly replace what Judge provides to the lineup, Cashman's apparent strategy has been to build organizational depth and flexibility that makes the team resilient to exactly this kind of unexpected disruption rather than betting everything on health and continuity. That philosophy, building for resilience rather than just building for a specific projected outcome, reflects lessons that experienced front office executives learn over years of seeing seasons derailed by injuries and unexpected circumstances that no amount of planning can fully prevent. The specific sequence of moves culminating in the Garcia trade suggests Cashman has been building a roster that can absorb disruption and remain competitive rather than a roster that only works if everything goes according to plan. Brian Cashman's master plan behind the Luis Garcia Jr. trade, once fully understood in the context of the broader sequence of moves this season, reveals something considerably more sophisticated than a simple deadline depth addition. This was calculated roster construction designed months in advance, executed through connected transactions that each created the conditions for the next, and specifically built around resilience and October flexibility rather than just regular season adequacy. As of August 2, 2026, the full picture behind this trade is finally coming into focus, and it paints Cashman as an executive playing a considerably longer and more sophisticated game than the initial reporting on this trade suggested. Warning: entertainment disclaimer. This content is based on publicly available reports and insider sources as of August 2, 2026. All analysis represents opinion and speculative commentary for entertainment purposes only. No affiliation with MLB, New York Yankees, or any individuals mentioned. For official information, visit Yankees.com.